Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research virtually. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO. And we're really pleased to have you here with us today for this Zoom webinar on the new book, This Was Not America, a wrangle through Jewish Polish American history, for which we're really delighted to have guests Michael Steinlauf and Elżbieta Janicka, our own Eddy Portnoy, Senior Academic Advisor and Director of Exhibitions at the YIVO Institute, will be leading today's event. And before I hand it over to Eddy, just a very brief word about YIVO for those that are new to YIVO. We're a very special place for the celebration and cultivation of Jewish history and Jewish culture. We have an archive and a library with over 23 million documents and over 400,000 books, which are used by researchers from around the world. And we seek to make those collections and the culture and history that are represented in them available to a broad public through exhibitions, classes, and public programs like this. So thanks so much for joining us. And without further ado, over to Eddy.
Okay. Again, welcome. Today we'll be discussing the new book, This Was Not America, a wrangle through Jewish Polish American history. And this book is very unique. It features a conversation which is sometimes contentious between Michael Steinlauf, historian of Polish Jewish culture and child of Holocaust survivors, and the anthropologist and artist Elżbieta Janicka. The conversation touches on critical moments in Jewish, Polish, and American history, including fleeing the Warsaw Ghetto, living underground, fighting for social justice in 1960s Seattle, and helping dismantle the communist system in 1980s Poland. Beyond individual biography, the talk ranges from the apparition of a Dybbuk in post-war Brooklyn to the consequences of a non-critical approach to Polish Jewish studies. And I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Elżbieta Janicka is a literary scholar and visual artist. She is the author of Sztuka czy Naród, Art or Nation, and Festung Warsaw, exposing violence and exclusion embedded in Polish dominant culture, as well as numerous studies of Polish anti-Semitism. Most recently, she co-authored Philo-Semitic Violence, Poland's Jewish Past and New Polish Narratives, which was published in 2021. Also with us today is Michael Steinlauf, the author of Bondage to the Dead, Poland and the Memory of the Holocaust, as well as numerous other studies of Jewish culture in pre-war Poland. He was one of the founders of the Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews. Currently, he's completing studies of the Polish Jewish dramatist Mark Arnstein and the Yiddish cultural hero Yud Lamed Peretz. Welcome to both of you. Now, this new book, and I have it in front of me right here. Let's see how well.
Wait.
Sort of blurry things.
Somehow it comes out fuzzy.
Yeah, it's how I have this set up. Sorry. Try this later. In any case, This Was Not America. Thank you. Thank you, Elżbieta. Excellent. So this book is essentially an extended interview that was conducted over a number of years and in a couple of different places. And it's an example of the Polish genre wywiad, or what's called river interview. So I really like this expression because this interview is long and it flows in all kinds of different ways, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, sometimes it hits the rocks. And it also goes off in unexpected directions, which create fascinating tributaries of thought. So I'd like to start out by asking what prompted this conversation and how it was brought to fruition in book form.
Well, Ella is
Michael,
responsible.
go ahead.
I should go ahead?
Go ahead.
It all came, the origins of this book purely came from Ella. She one day I get this I think it was a phone call and not a text, and saying, I think you said I read your book either 7 or 12 times, I don't know, and I'm sleepless over it, and or something like that, and I would like to do an interview. I would like to talk to you. I would like to have an interview with you. And quickly became this wywiad, this this thing that's in Polish, rooted in Polish culture. I don't know how far back it goes, but certainly in modern times, Wywiad Rzeka, you find someone who you think is interesting and you interview the hell out of them, and that's and then so we had a preliminary kind of thing, and then the rest of it, the structure of the book, the structure of the chapters and all this is again purely Elżbieta. And maybe Elżbieta, want to talk a little bit about that, about why, I mean, how because the chapters are funny. They're not, there's no chronology, no normal chronology, and it goes back and forth between the past and the present, and or close to the present, and it's kind of Elżbieta, please explain.
Yes, I wouldn't say that. It doesn't really go back and forth. It's just, it's put in a different order than a chronological one, but, but I will explain why we decided so. I proposed so, and we decided so. But to begin, I would love to specify that Michael Steinlauf is important to Polish culture, to Polish debate, because of his biography and his work, namely his book, Bondage to the Dead, Polish Memory of the Holocaust. And the argument of this was not America unfolds within these two areas. To explain why Mike's renown and importance is far from being exclusively academic, the story of the Dybbuk, of Michael's Dybbuk, was integrated into Polish literature and into Polish theater by two major artists of international renown. So as far as literature is concerned, I mean Hanna Kral's short story, The Dybbuk, that was published in 1995, and then a staging by Krzysztof Warlikowski entitled The Dybbuk as well, that combines Anski's Dybbuk and Kral's and Steinlauf's Dybbuk. There is one thing I regret about the book, and namely the fact that our conversation about these two appearances of the Dybbuk, so about the short story by Kral and then the staging by Warlikowski, was not included into the book, but I hope it will be published soon somewhere, and the endeavor our endeavor will be completed. And as far as the order of the chapters is concerned, we get started with the Polish 1980s. With the Polish 1980s, because I knew Michael as a big leftist, as I knew this revolutionary component of his biography from, the history of Columbia, the sit-in, the math hall, and on the other hand, from the story of the Seattle anti-capitalist underground of the early 1970s. And I was curious how such a figure could perceive what was going on in Poland in the 1980s, because the 1980s are the beginning of a backlash in Poland, a backlash that led to the restitution of capitalism and Catholicism. Michael, you say in your book, you say in our conversation that you understood that the trade union and the whole social movement, the trade union solidarity, and the whole social movement unfolded under the wings of, under the auspices of two major figures, namely Ronald Reagan and the Catholic Pope John Paul II. So I was curious to find out how you felt in this context with your biography.
Yeah.
You know what, could I just chime in for 1 second? Because I think it would be valuable for contextual purposes to understand a little bit about bondage to the dead, and just a sort of general summary of it, and also Michael's Dybbuk. So the audience can understand what what exactly these two, poles driving this interview are.
But you okay? Because I think it would make sense to leave the book for the further part. Michael, go ahead with Moishe.
Well, no. I mean, when you started talking about the 1980s and as a backlash, for me, that's similar. That could be compared to seeing the 1960s in America as the beginning of a backlash that brought about Ronald Reagan. So I don't buy that. I mean, or at least that was not my experience. I arrived in Poland and I saw the stirrings of freedom everywhere, and the people I kept company with, among them, actually, one of the first persons was Paweł Śpiewak, who just passed away, and Helena Dotner, and numerous other people, some other people. But for me, it was the opposite experience. I mean, well, for you, it wasn't an experience. I mean, you read about it, but for me, it was the experience of similar to the experience of that I had. I call it, it's stupid maybe, fighting for freedom. We fought for freedom at Columbia. We fought for freedom in Seattle. And there I was looking around for some other thing like that to fight for. And I arrived in Poland, and there was a beautiful battle going on. So true. And I said it was under the aegis of Ronald Reagan and the Pope. So what? It broke all the barriers. So anyway, that's I just had to put that in because my experience of the 1980s was really very different. Well, my experience was direct. I was there, and so that's basically, I just have to contest that. What we do in this book constantly is yell at each other. So
Michael, I was there as well.
How old were you?
But
you were what?
I was not that young. In 1983, I was 13 years old.
Okay.
And I was able to experience many things on the part of my peers, quite unpleasant ones. But I'm not the topic of the conversation. But could you say something, because Eddy asked us to explain this reference to the Dybbuk, what this Michael's Dybbuk is. Who is this?
Oh, I can talk about. Oh, you mean the origins? I mean, where the Dybbuk comes from? Yeah, the Dybbuk. I found out, rather late in life. I mean, there were hints about it in my. My parents are Holocaust survivors who survived the war in not in the Soviet Union, the way most Polish Jews survived, but in Poland, echt Poland. And my mother, the entire. You want me to cut it short?
Wait, you know what, Michael, could you repeat what you just said? You froze for a moment.
Oh,
Begin with
You,
my
you-
mother.
you left off when you were speaking about your mother, where she was in
my
Poland.
mother survived the entire war. In Polish is po aryjskiej stronie, on the Aryan side, pretending to be a Pole, Pole. Yeah, let's understand that when I say Pole, I mean Christian Pole, and Jews were as much Pole as, or sometimes more than Poles. But anyway, so yeah, and my father, in fact, and my father, on the other hand, spent until the end was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he was married. He had the good fortune, the really good fortune, to be married in I believe it was August 1939. Okay, and then imagine that, and then he had a child. He and his wife, not my mother, had a child, who in Jewish custom was named Michal, Moshe. And this child had the good fortune to be born in 1940, in the as the Warsaw Ghetto was taking shape. Now this child, with the liquidation of the ghetto, which was in July of 1942. Anyway, to make a long story short, the child vanished, presumably murdered, and that's it. And so it took me a long time to find out about this, because there were hints from my mother about this. My father died fairly early, when I was like 19 only, in 1967. And it was left to me to dig through this and to find out that my father indeed had another. My father had another wife. My father had this son, and so at a certain point in my life, I felt, I don't know how to explain it. I felt like I was very ill. I felt like something was possessing me, taking me somewhere. And this, the name I gave to it, was Dybbuk. Knowing a little bit about Jewish lore by then. Yeah, that's a picture of my brother. Two pictures of my brother, my half brother. And it was extraordinary the way, because my Aunt Helen, you see, my Aunt Helen was keeper of all the photographs, which I didn't see until after she died, when her daughter say, "Hey, look at this. These are photographs of your family." And who's that little child? Actually, she may have known about this. This is your. Anyway, she brought this out to me, and it was fairly late, and I was in my, what was it, 30s, I guess, by then. Anyway, and it was a revelation. To say revelation is not a good word for this. It was extraordinary.
Right. So how did it affect you?
It affected me that I started feeling that there was someone inside me. Now, can I explain how that feels? No, not really. It's like he's gone now. He's gone now. But I the only way I could deal with his presence in me was to speak through me, speak through my voice. I can still almost recall that feeling, it's like and go straight down into your gut. And he was in my gut. That's where he lodged. And you see, but this is, Dybbuk's, in traditional Dybbuk's, a Dybbuk did something, is the soul of a person who did something bad, and who returns because he can't kind of complete it. That's the traditional thing. There's I read about Dybbuk sighting. This guy comes back. This Dybbuk, this person dies, comes back as a Dybbuk, and why did you come back? Because I had to complete something. What did you have to complete? Well, I had to deal with the fact I was sent back here because I did something awful, and that's generally true. What in this particular case, which was interesting. He said, "Why did you come back?" Because I slept with boys, and this and he's transgressed somehow. Okay, so a Dybbuk often is the sign of transgression. The classic, the Dybbuk that attracts everyone's attention, the Ansky's Dybbuk is not that, of course. It's a love story, and he's innocent and all that. But traditional Dybbuks are what I said. And so here is this child who did absolutely nothing. What the fuck did he do? Nothing. He hardly, he lived for 2 years, 2.5 years maybe. So when he was inside me, he couldn't even talk, right? It's not like I could talk Polish to him much. It was like, can you imagine? The Dybbuk of a child whose last words might have been.
How did Michael Steinlauf's Dybbuk become part of Polish art and literature?
Right.
I hope that our conversation about it will be, published soon, because it was not included into the book. But I would, if I can comment on what Mike just has said. Your parents, Michael, got married in December 1938, and we found.
Excuse me, not my parents. My father. Hello?
I think we may have lost Elżbieta.
Yeah.
I
interrupted you to say that it wasn't my parents that got married in 1930.
No, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Your father and his first wife. So in December 38, and they asked their wedding guest, to send money to the Jewish refugees in Zbąszyn that were expelled from the Third Reich. They were Jews with Polish citizenship, and they were not let into Poland by the Polish authorities in 1938. As far as Moshe is concerned, the little Maryś, Michał, the most common, of course, we don't know how he died or how he was killed, but we know how he could have been killed, because the most common way in which this kind of things happened. First of all, his mother survived, and he was with his mother. They were hiding during a roundup, and it's not impossible that he was just,
Smothered.
Smothered.
So there is a reason to be really concerned with this story. But if I can come back to the chronology or to the order in which we are developing our argument. Even if we don't argue about the term backlash, the 80s in Poland are the moment when the questions about equal rights, emancipation, women's rights, social and economic justice stop being asked. And the public attention is deviated toward from the present and the future. It's deviated toward the past, toward and not the past as it really was, but an idyllic version of the past. And this maneuver enabled this comeback of capitalism and Catholicism that took possession of our lives in Poland, and not only of our lives, but also of many crucial domains of public life. But after the 80s, we go to talk about the 60s, because I wanted to confront the 80s with Michael's revolutionary past. Then we move from Columbia to Seattle. I think there were some questions about Seattle to Mike in the chat. Then, as Michael, at the end of the 70s, Michael withdraws from his commitment, his political commitment, and joins Jewish studies at Brandeis. I wanted to know why this choice, and so we go on to talk about the origins and Brighton Beach, and this is in this part of the conversation while describing how the family life in Brighton Beach looked like, that Mike says this was not America. And from his description is extremely moving, and we understand that he grew up in a kind of a Poland, and in a kind of a wartime Poland. And this is why he says, this was not America, and I felt the urge to escape to America, to join America. Then, as we are in, so we also in this part we address the biographies of his parents without addressing the Dybbuk issue. The Dybbuk appears only at the end of the argument of the book, yes. So Michael explains in this part pertaining to the late 70s and 80s, while he got to Brandeis, why he got interested in, on the one hand, Polish language, Jewish culture, and Marek Arnstein, and on the other hand, in Yiddish culture, represented by parrots. Then followed the two parts devoted to Michael's book, Bondage to the Dead, follow.
You know,
and then an end that is devoted to Maryś Mojsze, your brother, your half brother.
right. So in consideration of this chronology, Michael, I wonder if you would briefly just go over this these transitions that you made from immigrant child in Brighton Beach to revolutionary in Columbia and in Seattle to academic experiences and social experiences in Poland. Just in a nutshell, maybe you could sort of explain that.
Right. I have to say, just parenthetically, that Elżbieta is the only person that I allow to call me Mike.
Why is that?
Poles seem to like it. Poles seem to think it's cute or something,
I think it's a very American sounding name.
Yeah, it's very American sounding. All right, but let's not go with here. I just wanted to parenthetically say this. But I consider that a compliment to Elżbieta, that I don't bother her about it.
I think your cousin calls you the same way.
Myra, yeah, you're right. She does. Boy, you got ears. Good, yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay. So I wanted to escape from Brighton Beach, and amazingly enough, it wasn't geographically, it wasn't very different. It wasn't very distant. I mean, I escaped from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and got into Columbia, and lo and behold, there's some shaking going on, at Columbia very gradually. And I totally identified with it. I remember having a long conversation with my with my counselor, a floor counselor, asking, when is it permitted to break the law in defense of something higher than the law? And he was a philosophy student, and he convinced me that it was okay. Civil disobedience to stuff for starters was a good thing to do. Anyway, I just found it was totally exhilarating to be part of this movement, which resulted in Columbia. 700 people were busted in one night, and I among them. And then,
this is after having occupied.
Well, we occupied all the buildings, and I occupied. Each building had a reputation, and the one I chose, Math Hall, had the most extreme reputation. All the crazies were there. There was a group which called themselves the motherfuckers of the Lower East Side. For example, they were anarchists, and they joined us. And Tom Hayden, if you know who that is, he's probably forgotten by now. We elected him head of our commune, the math commune. That's who we were. There's about 80 of us in there, and we all got busted together. I was actually busted along with Paul Auster, who some of you may have heard of. Is a very well-known writer, and we were in a little room, and we locked arms. There's me, him, and two girls, and we locked arms when the cops came, and they were pissed as hell because we had soaped the stairs, so they were falling all over the place, and they were angry as hell. And so I when I wouldn't move, I was the first one because I had long hair, wacko in the head, and I was so proud. I was walked out of Math Hall with blood streaming down my head. So this was what, you see, looking back, my attraction to this movement, which was what I call it a freedom movement, it didn't have an exact demands. I mean, it did have demands, of course, in terms of what was going on in Colombia. But it was a larger thing. It was feeling freedom. It was an emotional thing. It was just the feeling of smashing things up in defense of the human spirit. I mean, it's big words, but that's what it felt like. Anyway, so and then in Seattle, and then I couldn't continue. I was signed up for English studies, which I couldn't do anymore. So I just left and went out and did organizing in Seattle, but side by side with some people who decided they were going to do more than organize. They're going to create a defense squad and more than a defense squad, an offense squad, and they called themselves the George Jackson Brigade, after George Jackson, who was a Black Panther, who was murdered who was Black Panther convict in prison, who was murdered by the police. So that's people in the George Jackson Brigade. I mean, one of them was my best friend, but I was not a member, but I just saw what they were doing. They were doing what I considered back then righteous things. I mean, we had issues with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and one day, all these reporters come swarming around us and say, Did you hear the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Portland was just bombed, just blown up? So, those were acts of violence. They have to be seen in context of those times. There were acts of violence not to kill a lot of people. There were acts of violence in which someone would call in and say, "Get the hell out of here! This place is going to blow." Okay, the intention was not to kill people. Just to make that clear, it was never intended that way. Anyway, but and my best friend was killed trying to rob a bank back then, and with his comrades, but he was the only one killed, Bruce Seidel. And then after that, for a variety of reasons, I decided, I had to get out of there, among other reasons, very, very concretely, because my last address was Bruce's last address. I had taken over his lodgings, and so all kinds of people came, all kinds of official people were going to come at me, and I was probably going to have to talk to a grand jury at that point, when it became clear what the George Jackson Brigade was all about. So I decided to what today would be called go underground. I mean, I just disappeared for a while, and I left Seattle, and is this the kind of background you're looking for?
I mean, yeah. I mean, essentially, how does one go from being a university and then underground revolutionary,
okay, and then
to becoming a major figure in Polish Jewish studies?
Well, I'm almost there, because I left, and I said, listen, if I can't do this, then let me at least find out something about about the world that was destroyed. I turned to my parents' world, and at first it was just academic, my interest, but quickly became much more than that. And when I got the opportunity through this Fulbright grant to come to Poland in '83, that was a turning point for me, because I arrived and there was again what I would consider a whole lot of shaking going on. It was not for me. I mean, this is where Elżbieta and I totally disagree, because it's like to say that period was the beginnings of a reactionary time in Poland. For me, that's like saying that the 60s were brought Ronald Reagan to power. I don't believe that. I don't believe
He
that.
was there. He was there in Poland.
Yeah.
He was there.
Yeah. Okay. But so yeah. I mean, so every motion towards liberation creates a backlash, of course, and sometimes that backlash takes over. But anyway, in Poland, and so much of my politics are personal politics. They're not. I don't have I didn't launch a program. I didn't. I was never, in fact, the head of anything. I was just a participant, always a fully, and a participant in such a way that I got into the most often I got into just about as much trouble as I could get into, but not quite the worst. My friend Bruce was killed. That I wouldn't have gone to anyway. So there we go. So I went to study, and I found something I needed to pursue, and I arrived in Poland, and I found that I'm sorry to disagree with Elżbieta here, but I found in Poland another liberation movement. I found another way of fighting to be free, and I fully now, but my difference was that I brought an outside eye, and I felt after a while of being in Poland for almost a year, I felt that I could maybe contribute something, which and put things together. I mean, because my strength is always my analytical thinking is often crappy, but I have this synthetic thing in me where I can pull things together, and I felt that I could pull together what not all the people in Poland were capable of doing, and pull it together this Polish Jewish thing. And so Elżbieta is waving her hand, so she wants to say something, I think. Eddy, did you want
So Elżbieta, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so when you see a liberation movement led by Ronald Reagan and the Catholic Pope,
They weren't led by, I'm sorry, I have to say, I have to interrupt. They weren't led by, those were figureheads.
Yes,
People,
yes, that's true. That's true. They were patrons. But anyhow, today in Warsaw, you have a huge monument to the solidarity movement with two pictures, one of Reagan, the second one of John Paul II, and no one else is portrayed in this, within the area of the monument. So I just, I just wanted to say that it was not a liberation movement that triggered the backlash, but this was the beginning of the backlash itself. But for instance, in terms of women's rights or social, social and economic justice. But anyhow, as far as I wanted to say something about the book, because this book is a very important book of reference, widely quoted, and its title is Bondage to the Dead, Polish Memory of the Holocaust. And I wanted to say what was the framework in which this book appeared. Because and why it became so important in Poland. In Poland, everything Michael calls Jewish issues, Jewish things, finds itself at the core of Poland, Polishness, Polish society and culture. And it has always been like that. And it's even more so after the war. And this is the case for the simple reason that the Polish understanding of the community never underwent a laicization, a secularization, and a citizen redefinition. So the criterion of belonging is used to be purely religious to the community. Then it became, the national layer came, supplemented it. But you have these two layers of the collective identity, and it's easy to grasp when we think of the figure of Poland imagined as the Christ of the nations. And it really works in Polish imaginary, in Polish, literature, culture, but also public discourse. And well, and now what's at stake of any voice that appears in this Polish Jewish area? Also, for this definition of the collective identity, what's most important is the figure of the constitutive enemy, with respect to whom the community defines itself, and it's the imagined Jew. And what's at stake at any voice that appears in this sphere is the question whether the Polish community can continue with its way of thinking, regardless of what this way of thinking brought about, namely Polish co-participation into the Holocaust, but also anti-Semitic violence before the war and after the war. Or this definition of the community caused so many and so much damage that it's not possible to be just to be continued, that it has to be reassessed and rejected. And then Michael's book is a part and parcel of this debate. And it's a very contradictory book because on the one hand, Michael describes the events truthfully and precisely, and while reading his description, we understand that it couldn't be worse. While the second layer of the book, namely the interpretation of this picture, is surprisingly departing from the facts, and this is why it took my sleep away, because I couldn't even believe how one layer could accompany the other, and this is the topic of our conversation about the book, Michael's book. And what I just the conclusion. I think it was greeted with. It's so popular in the scholarly field because it doesn't really. The conclusion of this book is not that Polish dominant culture and society had to, reassess their beliefs and just change.
Can I just say, going back to the moment when you contacted me, it was short and sweet in that sense. I mean, you said, "Listen, your book. I have to talk to you because your book is is contradictory and fascinating. You know, I can't, because what's fascinating is that on the one hand, you've got it all right in terms of what happened, but your interpretation of it is bullshit. And so the interpretation is based on this notion of what do you call it?
Lifton?
Robert J. Lifton. You see, Robert J. Lifton, who studied events of a horrendous murder and Hiroshima, Robert J. Lifton came up with this notion that of trauma. You know, and today, of course, you know, trauma is at the center of so many studies and fascinating to people. You know, but so I used Lifton to say that Poles were subjected to the traumatic experience of watching the Jews murdered, and that can go to explain at least some of what happened, and it turns out, you know, in hindsight, that's not a good way to look at it, because and this is from especially from very recent. That was 25 years ago, and Poland seemed it was on track seemed not to be on track to join Europe in a normal way and to be liberal, and that didn't happen. But so this was an attempt, but you know, we now know from recent scholarship and recent, you know, people, you know, that Poles were not, by and large. I mean, this notion of traumatic spectators doesn't work, and also based on what in Poland is called the third stage of the Holocaust. The first stage is ghettoization. The second stage is murder. The third stage is picking out the survivors and
hunting for Jews.
Yeah, and murdering them. So, and the dynamic of the hunt for survivors, you know, in this so-called third phase of the Holocaust, has convinced me that they were a lot more than idle than spectators who were traumatized. Poles, you know, it wasn't right. They were active participants, not always, but to an extent, certainly, that I didn't accept, that I didn't realize back in the 25 years ago. So yeah.
All right, go ahead, Elżbieta.
You know, I say it in the book, but I would like to bring it about your description of the facts of the events, the actual events, loses nothing of its accuracy in the light of the most recent findings. You know it also through the experience of your parents. But what I would add to your revision of your interpretation, I would say that because we attribute these crimes, these Polish crimes against Jews we attribute them to the third phase of the Holocaust. But to my mind, and to the margins of the Holocaust, but to my mind, this co-participation started. I mean, it didn't happen at the level of, I mean, in the third phase or on the margins, but it happened at the level of the framework of the Holocaust, because Poles were there before, during, and after. And as we know, the Holocaust didn't stop with the war, in Poland at least. So that would be my point. And yes, and as far as this collective responsibility is concerned, of course, the murders of Jews by Poles were perpetrated by precise individuals. but these individuals acted with the socio-cultural legitimacy behind them, and they could rely on their communities, on the groups. It's difficult to kill somebody, while knowing that you will be banned from humanity for it. So it was the opposite.
Can I add something to support that, what you're saying? Because this always struck me as being like an amazing, Emanuel Ringelblum wrote that, and he watched it all happen. He wrote that if someone's running through the street, pursued by police in the ghetto, the assumption is that this is or anywhere in Warsaw, the assumption is that this is a member of, if the assumption is that this is a member of the Polish underground, people will let him pass and even try to help him. But if for a second those chasing him go catch that Jew, then all is lost, because he'd be turned in lickety split. So that for me, that one description, that one event, is very, very deeply resonated.
Relevant.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. This went very quickly, and there are a couple of questions that people have put up that I think we can address. One person has two questions for you. They want to know at what age you came to the U.S., and also what proportion of the Jews in the underground, what proportion of the underground of the 1960s was Jewish?
Okay, well, I can go backwards and say, that question. The underground, I don't know about the underground, but certainly at Columbia, it was mainly Jewish, I think. Most of the people, or at least half, but no one acknowledged it, and for a lot of us, I think the Holocaust was behind everything. This was a fact. I came to the United States when I was 3 years old. My parents got a visa to come, and
you came from Paris. You
were
born in Paris.
Yeah, France. I was born in Paris. My parents, it's a long story about how they got there. It was difficult, but they finally got there, and I was just born, and my mother was pregnant with me. All kinds of exciting stories about how they crossed the Alps in the springtime and all this, and yeah, so that's the short version, and there's a bit more of it in the book where I describe how I came to that. So I guess that's a short answer to that question.
Right. And another question, because I guess it's Erev Pesach. Someone asks what the Passover Seders were like in Brighton Beach, and if there was anything from Polish culture that was included in the Seder, or even in the culture of that world.
Well, I have to say that Polish culture and Poles were not exactly popular. It was, nothing good could be said about the Poles at those things. Nothing good. I grew up, and this included my parents, which always stunned me. But that's a situation. And in Brighton Beach, it was Brighton. If you include Queens, then I could say, because of my aunt had these elaborate seders in Queens and in Forest Hills. It was it's a traditional, I don't know, long, lots of guests and all of my aunt's cooking, which was pretty good. And then, but the first Seder was always just my mother, my father, and me. Yeah, there's a picture.
Here we have a photo of one of these Seders.
Yeah, and that's my aunt. And then the first night was always my parents and I only. Which was a whole, and my mother barely knew how to cook, so she did a few good things, but because she always had servants, in Poland, she wasn't very good at cooking.
Right. Okay. Interesting. All right. So unfortunately, we're out of time. But at least we got an interesting taste of this new book. This Was Not America: A Wrangle Through Jewish Polish American History. I'd like to thank Elżbieta Janicka and Michael Steinlauf, the authors of this fascinating new book. And I suggest that you pick it up and read it. It's a fascinating look into the life of Michael Steinlauf, but also how his work is of interest and how it's affected Polish Jewish history and academia. So thanks very much, everyone. I wish everyone a freilichen and a kosher Pesach, if that's the way you're going to go. And be well. See you next time.